Well, good morning, everybody. Here's my rundown for the content of the video today. We're going to talk about Hurricane, or now Tropical Storm Debby, and its eventual path as it lingers over parts of the southeast. We're going to also look at what's going on in the East Pacific, because there's a very unique event that's taking shape with two tropical systems that are in the East Pacific. I'm going to step back and look at the broader picture of where the precipitation will be coming across the rest of the country for the next 10 to 15 days, including some important updates on the cooler air that's advancing toward the south, coming from the northern plains of the United States. I then want to stretch this out and look longer term. So at the very end of this, we're going to look again at the rest of August. We're going to look at the beginning of September. And then we're going to talk about the new European data that just came in and look at North American fall and winter and also South American spring and summer. So I got a lot loaded up for you today. The animation, of course, is showing just looking back over the last 12 hours or so of what was once Hurricane Debby and now Tropical Storm Debby. And Debby is going to be spending a lot of time in this area, putting down a lot of very heavy rainfall. Now, before I dig into kind of some of the recent impacts, I do want you to see something here. Do you notice all the area where we have clear air echo? Do you see how it flashes across there and you see a lot more clear air echo? That's sunset. And at sunset, we get a couple of interesting things happening with the radar beam. There's a little bit of ducting that begins to occur as the inversion builds. That's the first part. But usually what most of that echoes from until the sun rises the next day is bugs. And what's very interesting is as the sun rises the next morning, you can also see birds on this. So before we talk about the hurricane, watch right at the very end of this animation. In fact, I'll pause it. And you see these little small rings that show up here? These are birds leaving roost in the morning. So you can kind of see as I kind of rock back and forth right there. Okay, back to the storm system, though. Over the last 72 hours, we have seen rainfall totals that have been above 15 to 18 inches in parts of Florida. And as this has gone through the southeastern parts of Georgia, widespread 6 to 10 inches in through this area, including parts of South Carolina. We still have a lot of folks without power this morning, so some still in Nebraska. These are still being tracked from last week's severe line of storms that moved through parts of Omaha. And then we have in Georgia, 27,000 out, South Carolina, 18,000, but in Florida, still 109,000. And the great thing about this site, which is poweroutage.us, is you can kind of get down to individual county level. And that was where the strongest winds of this hurricane did pass through. Speaking of winds, I pulled up this morning's data. And just to kind of look for some of the stronger winds with this system as it's rolling around. And we can see several places where these gusts are getting up, over 30 miles an hour. It actually still technically at its eye has, in its eye wall, what's left of it still has sustained winds at around 45 miles an hour, keeping this a tropical storm. But what will be fun to watch later today is how this moves out over into the open ocean. And when I say fun, I mean that more of in a scientific meteorological sense, because the waters here are so warm. It'd be interesting to see how quickly this kind of gains more strength as it turns right back into the Carolina coast before heading up through Virginia towards, the mid-Atlantic and eventually out. But the steering currents around this are very weak and slow. And you can see to the north later today where the cold front is trying to push its way into the central U.S. So this is an animation for much later on today. The other thing we're going to talk about in just a few moments is I want you to keep an eye on these two tropical systems here. They're getting quite close to one another, and we're going to have to see what they do in terms of behaving according to the typical thing called the Fujiwara effect. Okay, from there, let's go have a look at the current track. So this is the 5 a.m. update on Tropical Storm Debby, and you can see how it is expected to roll out into open ocean here and then make the turn back into South Carolina, North Carolina. And by early Saturday morning, moving up, in and around the D.C. area will be the remnants of this tropical system. And along its way, it is expected to, again, just move very slowly, increasing the risk of very heavy rainfall. This is out 3 days, and that's the forecast spread on the models. And this morning's GFS was a lot wackier than other models. It's the one that went way over here and brought this back in, but we overall think this is an outlier to the forecast path of this tropical system. So if we look at all of it in total, the WPC map kind of zoomed in on that area. We're looking at a 7-day precipitation total, that broad area of 1 to 3 inches up to 4 inches in and around this part of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia. But if we kind of zoom in here on the Carolinas, this is widespread, 10 to 15 inches. Just for perspective, where I live over here is my little county right there. This would be a quarter of a year's worth of rainfall for us. And so this is going to cause some massive flooding. Just for some perspective, for those of you that aren't in this area, this is a substantial event in terms of how much rainfall it'll eventually put down in total. Just to kind of step back, though, and look at the bigger picture across the United States, we have seen the models increasing the precipitation throughout this part of the plains and extending better into Kansas and Missouri in the latest forecast runs. It was kind of a hint we looked at yesterday in the forecast. But before I dig into that and talk a bit about what's going on in the West, I do want to show you this. So this is an animation from this morning's European model. Sorry, I went back in time there. I want you to watch those two tropical systems that are currently separated from one another here. And normally what happens when we see this is that the systems tend to orbit one another. We call it the Fujiwara effect, named after the scientist who discovered this. And they're doing that. So you can see one is going to curl around like this, the other is going to curl around like that. And it's typically very difficult for tropical systems to basically come in contact with one another. I think you can understand why, right? If the flow is coming around this tropical system like that, and in the same direction, watch, like this, these are competing directions, and therefore there's a cancellation. In this particular case, the southern storm system being so much stronger, as the northern one wraps around, see right here? This is, again, by tonight, getting into, there we go. Watch how the two kind of collapse. And the stronger one to the south absorbs almost the moisture and wipes out the circulation for the northern system. It will, of course, cause it to weaken, but it's important to see that that is a unique situation where tropical systems are, they're combining. So a very compelling bit of science here just to think this through. And I think a lot of folks in the meteorological community will watch this today and think hard about it. Okay, from there, I'm going to come back to just a quick national picture here as the sun is rising. There's our main frontal boundary. There's the clouds from Debby. Look how sharp the edge is on this. So there's parts of Georgia and Alabama that can probably see the cloud shield here, but this bright blue skies early this morning. Yesterday, just thinking back on it, some large storms erupted in the upper Midwest, also rolling around throughout the Four Corner states. You can see some more wildfire smoke, which we'll talk again about in a second. But I wanted to show you that front that's diving into the upper Midwest. Temperatures behind it have already cooled off, 15 to 20 degrees in some places. And we've already seen the major cool down behind this. So this is just the last 24 hours as this has started to cool off. Total rainfall, just kind of looking here again across the whole country for the last 72 hours. Some of the storms that rolled through here were pretty nasty yesterday, including 22 reports of tornadoes. If we go back and have a look at it, there we go. You can see 22 tornadoes, 112 reports in total, some stronger winds that kind of came out of southern Minnesota in and around this part of northern Illinois. And then also you can see more wind damage in New York, which, remember, back in July took several systems that hit pretty hard. There was some hail and wind over near Idaho, parts of Utah and Oregon as well. We'll take a look at that in a second when we examine the smoke out west. But I wanted to show you the animation from the radar yesterday just across the upper Midwest. And a couple of things you can see. You can watch the individual storms here. These are the ones that produce the tornado reports that roll across part of Iowa into southern Wisconsin eventually, and then hitting Chicago, overnight. But early this morning, you'll see actually the same thing that you saw in the animation that I showed you over the southeast. And that is, watch this, at the very end, do you see the circle showing up? Those are birds, again, leaving roost. And I also want to point out, look how well defined the frontal boundary is here on radar. Just amazing to see that. Now, thinking about this area getting another round of heavy rain, I just was this morning pulling up some longer term data. So since the beginning of this year, so January 1 through August the 5th, these are our precipitation ranks. And I think it's important just to note that there are parts of southern Minnesota, getting into this part of Wisconsin, that are now having their wettest year on record. And what's important to think about here is that 1993 is in this as well. That was a year when this all flooded in a major way, sending all that water down the Mississippi. But that was a bigger and broader area of excessively wet conditions, June and July in this area. We saw a lot of this heavy rainfall early in this season, and that's what's key to think about here. Now, that's just the Midwest. That's one spot to look at. And tonight, I'll be driving up to Galena to give a talk I will not be producing a video tomorrow morning, and the reason is I have to also get tonight back down to Martin, Tennessee for an event tomorrow, and it's about an 8-hour drive, and so I'll need to kind of pass on the early morning videos. I may not get in until 2 or 3 in the morning here, so I'll miss tomorrow, but I'll pick right back up again on Thursday. I got to head to Owensboro for another event, so a lot of great interaction with growers this week. I'm very excited just to hear what they've been experiencing and try to understand better meteorologically how we can forecast those experiences. So I always enjoy this, the ability to talk to those folks. Okay, I mentioned we're going to go back out to the west. Sun's trying to rise there, but yesterday, here's some of the deeper storms we saw that produced the severe wind reports and the hail. But the wildfire smoke continues to be just prolific in parts of Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. You can see some of the new larger fires that have erupted there. And if we just watch over the next, this is only going to go out about 18 hours today. The forecast run this morning may not have completed, or maybe I picked the wrong one. Maybe I picked the 5 UTC. Sorry, I grabbed it and I let it load while I put up other slides. It doesn't matter. You get the idea here. More of that wildfire smoke is spreading, getting pulled into that front as it sags farther to the south. And you can see the circulation from Debby kind of keeping the broader smoke shield around it, right? This is not going to be so thick that you're going to see it, but certainly in the west you will. Okay, all hazards map this morning, just a hair before 7 o'clock. Excuse me. Flood watches have now kind of extended farther into the Carolinas and now into parts of the the Northeast as well. We still have the heat that's behind this system, but the front is dipping down and it's going to be getting through here pretty quickly. These are air quality alerts, excessive heat watches, warnings, and advisories out in the western United States. Severe weather-wise, today on the 6th, we're going to keep an eye on the eastern Great Lakes, parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. We're going to watch for the storms to blow up here. We'll also keep an eye on what's left with Debby. And then the upper Midwest. So you have this front that's pushing up against the mountains here. Excuse me. This is the northern plains, not the upper Midwest. But pushing up against the mountains, we can see some monsoonal flow coming into Arizona, increasing the risk there. Looking at day 2, this is the SPC outlook, a couple of areas of marginal risk. And this is day 3. From there, let's go on and have a look at the high-res NAM. The high-res NAM was very well initialized this morning, so I was pretty impressed with that. And as I play this forward throughout the day today, this will be this evening. That's that corridor through which we're going to watch for some strong to severe storms and then back into Montana. And from there, getting into out of Tuesday into Wednesday morning, Wednesday midday, Wednesday evening. I mean, look at this. We still have Debby spinning. Storms in the central plains of the United States. This will be in the overnight hours Wednesday into early Thursday morning, according to the NAM. And we'll pause this out here midday on Thursday just to kind of get a look as to where this is all going. The story, as you know, normally know that I like to do is it's all in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And I got a big question about some of the new forecast data. So picking this up, troughs and ridges, right? So this is the cooler air that's coming down that we're expecting through the end of the week to invade the midsection of the country. This is just kind of the second round of it. There is where the artificial intelligence is taking Debby. And we can then see Debby getting pulled into the Northeast later this week, absorbed by the upper level trough and out. Now what's behind this is what's intriguing to me. Into early next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there's broad troughing across the west. And if there's a ridge, it's been really kind of screwed down tight into the southern part of the United States and flattened. And what's kind of stuck in the middle here is a more of a transient feature. Because as we play this out, by the time we get out there day 10, 11, look at the amplitude to that flow. And this is what I want to know if that really does show up and manifest itself in that area. Because we've been watching a trend toward that. It's been kind of showing up that there's going to be this, after the 17th, 18th, 19th, some troughing in the western United States. That'll bring in a brief interlude of heat in the midsection of the country, but more than likely this will move. And that's going to initiate the chances into that week 2 time frame of storms. Kind of see it opening up there and moving. So 3 or 4 or 5 days of heat coming in here, but with a broad trough like this showing up in the models right now, that's going to be an important thing to be watching. So I went to the ensemble to see if it's being reflected in the PNA. So the Pacific North American pattern, remember, this is where it's positive and there are ridges. There's the trough coming in. Again, when 10, 11, 12, 13. We want to know if the second one's coming back here. That is the 17th, 18th, and 19th. The ensemble average is showing that. Some of the operational runs or the control run, maybe this time didn't, but look at the ensemble average, which is what we're looking here in this kind of box and whisker plot. So there seems to be some evidence that this is going to be the case. Now let's go ahead and look at the other models. We already looked at the WPC 7-day, so let's now look at the 7 and 10-day from the AIFS. There's the 7-day outlook. Now watch the midsection of the U.S. Much bigger chances, much better chances of rain in the artificial intelligence. Now I'm going to say this. I feel as though in summer the AIFS has struggled a bit with convection. It needs big broad fronts. I think it's better at predicting those. But the rainfall increases in Oklahoma and in Kansas and Missouri have been quite large in these last couple of runs. The NBM is beginning to show something similar as well. This is the 7-day, but watch as I add in day 10. See how that's building into this area? And if we look at the ECMWF, that's the 7-day. It's already there, but by day 10, we've increased it as well. So there's some multi-model support for seeing an increase in rainfall in some of these key areas that have been drier. And I know I have a lot of you in Kansas that watch. You've been quite concerned about some of the, very disappointing trends in the week 2 forecast in terms of total precipitation. And yes, the models have been over predicting, but this trend we've got now is one that we need to watch together just to see how this is going to play out. The GFS is a bit different. This is the 7-day GFS and this is the 10. And it's got a much different look on this overall, which means I'm going to go and rely more on probabilities. But to compare the models out to the next 7 days, again, when you look at this, these colors were where the European is wetter and by how much, and this is where the GFS is wetter and by how much. And remember how I just noted that the GFS really just goes into much farther inland and then turns the system out. You can see that pretty clearly in the Georgia precipitation pattern. But take note, the European is the wetter of the models through Kansas and Missouri, an area we were just discussing. So let's go ahead and look at the models side by side. And we're going to take a look now at how things shape up once we get, the hurricane or tropical storm Debby back on shore. So by the time we get into Friday, what did the GFS do? Took it out and brought it back here. The European took it out and took it north. So that little subtle difference is a world of difference if you're in Georgia. So at this point, the ECMWF has got this more, I would say, consistent track farther to the north on this system right now, and we just need to pay attention to it as we go forward. Now, into this weekend, this is Saturday getting into Sunday, the main frontal boundary will be sitting here behind the cooler air that's to the north, and that's where we're going to watch for the stronger storms getting into Sunday night, Monday morning. We then play forward into Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, and what we're going to be watching is the flow around this larger high. And you can see that's where the stormier corridor is in the European, and it's much different in the GFS, which is why I just got to get away from it and look at the ensemble probabilities. So if we're looking for who's dry, of course the west is. This is very common. But the drier spots start in western Texas and roll across over here to the delta. This has been the area that has seen an improvement in precipitation probabilities. So a 10-day outlook on this, again, is the map that shows the probability of staying under 1/10 of an inch. And this is now showing the probability of going over an inch. And where it's increased a lot has been right in this corridor. So we've already talked about this. This is all the trough coming through plus Debby soaking this region. In fact, let's step it up. There's the probability of 2 inches. Very high in this area. Let's keep going. This is the probability of 4, probability of 8. So this is looking like in parts of North and South Carolina, a 50 to 80% chance of over 8 inches of precip. But again, what I really wanted you to see was our wetter corridors versus the drier. And that's, I think, the main takeaway from where this pattern's taking us through the middle part of August. On the week 2 side of things, where that negative P&A shows back up, so if there is troughing here, they've gone over wetter. But it'll be interesting to see how that trough influences storm activity here. You're getting 2 pieces with respect to the wetter conditions that stretch from Alberta all the way down to Missouri. One is the cooler air and the frontal boundary that's sitting here. 2 is when the negative P&A comes back. That's the West Coast trough, possibly initiating more storms in that area. So very interesting forecast in the near term. So I'm going to show you a map we haven't looked at in a long time. It's the GDD map. So I found this interesting, growing degree day anomalies starting on April 1. There's very limited areas across the country that have got negative values. Parts of the northern plains, remember we were missing out on some early season GDD accumulation, so there's a couple places that are off, but most of the rest of the country is above average. And I think a lot of this has been coming from the the overnight lows. I almost always show you the average temperatures when we look at this. This is average low temperatures. And so remember, much of July was very cool in the midsection of the U.S. But if you look now at June and July, that whole time period, there's very few pockets that were actually on the cooler side of average in the overnight lows. Most parts of the U.S. had near normal to warmer than normal overnight lows this, through June and July. So going from there toward the temperatures, there you can see our front very clearly defined later today. Let's blow this up for you. One more time. There you go. This is now tomorrow, much cooler air penetrating all the way down into parts of the mid-south. Very hot to the south of that, hot in the west. It's amazing to think 112, 106, that's actually on the cooler side of average in Arizona, but we're watching for storms down here. All right, that's Wednesday into Thursday. We may be struggling to get out of the 60s in parts of Montana. A week ago, it was 105 here. This is keeping all that heat down into Texas and Oklahoma. There's Friday's high temperatures compared to average Saturday into Sunday and Monday. The heat where it stays is primarily in this corridor during this entire time frame. Day 5 through 10 continues to show it there. And again, this is that cooler air around that broader area of high pressure that's going to keep the risk of storms alive in this area, but much drier and cooler air coming into the central U.S. Day 10 through 15, this comes back to the discussion we had the other day. Yesterday, are we going to see a rebuilding of heat in the second half of this month? We can tell that the European model has a similar outlook. Watch, this is day 5 through 10, which gets you out there to the 16th. As we go forward, day 10 through 15, which gets you to the 21st, now we start to see the cooler here? That could be that negative PNA with the ridge opening up for a few days in the midsection of the country. So to follow up on yesterday's narrative before I get to the new long range, this is the latest update from the CFSV2. Their week 3, week 4 went much drier in the interior of the United States. In this model, just so you're very well aware of what goes on here, it tomorrow could show soaking wet weather in here. It bounces all over the place with precipitation, but it's much more consistent with temperatures. And this is this end of August heat that's coming into the middle part of North America. Now, we made a case that in order for that to happen, we had to have ridging that anchored here, right? Because if you can get the ridge to anchor there and we have higher than normal heights here, this would create a situation in the midsection of the country with hotter temperatures. So there's still some kind of building toward that. And if we zoom in on the United States, the pressure will be low. That's not the case. I still think it storms at the end of August and beginning of September in the midsection of the country. But if we look at the temperatures here, this goes to mid-September. It does appear that we're walking into a warmer than average late fall and late August, early September. I just want to be clear, though. I don't see this as like mega heat wave, unendurable heat for the midsection of the country. Maybe down into the southern plains, an area we've been concerned about all along, but I don't think it extends. I just think it's warmer than average, and we just need to think that through. On the precip side of things, there was a drier trend in the model with the latest data, but again, this could all disappear with one tropical system, because this forecast just takes you out to the peak of the tropical season. We still have half of it to go after this. So we have to be very careful with looking at precipitation forecasts at this time of, actually any time of year, but especially at this time of year, given the tropical disturbances that can happen to change this all up. So I'm not going to put any weight on this right now. So let's now look at one other thing. The current ocean temperatures. Remember, supporting that forecast of warmer late August into September, not blistering hot, but the warmth change, are three things: the warm water here and here, and the pressure patterns that result or interact with that, and the cooler water here, which is a part of our La Nina. Now, this La Nina continues to struggle to get going, but July did do one thing. It gave us a few episodes of what we call easterly wind bursts. So, the trade winds go in this direction, the westerlies go in that direction, right? So there's trade winds here, and there's also a westerly wind belt down there as well. These trade winds, and what we're looking at here, typically lie between the surface and about 850 millibars. And whenever you see this shading, this would represent faster than normal trade winds. So we have seen that, and that's what helped this surge of dropping ocean temperatures here in July. But lately they bounce back up, and they're going to continue to do this. This is, La Ninas just don't come plowing in with consistent development. During summer and during fall, they kind of oscillate up and down. But we'll pay attention to see if this comes back down again and just works its way somewhere down here with time. What's interesting is the new European model, which was initialized with that change in July, is now a bit more aggressive at trying to develop weak La Nina conditions. So there are more of the ensemble members, as I denote here, that are in the kind of La Nina territory with ocean temperatures than before. But if you take it at where it is, this is suggesting weak La Nina INSO-neutral through winter. But the European model's new fall and winter forecast actually has quite a bit of a La Nina flavor to it. And I kind of highlighted a few of the things over this precipitation map. And you're going, well, show me the temperatures. I'm not going to. They are not going to verify. So we're going to look at precip in this case. But could we get an early onset to the wet season in the Northwest? If La Nina comes in, yeah, October could really start to get wet in the Northwest, and especially in November. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we generally see drier conditions that spread across parts of the central U.S. and across the southern tier of the U.S., but the hurricane season can always outdo that. And remember, we're going to be active with hurricanes all the way into September and October. But the winter forecast is very similar to what I showed you from the CPC last week. And it's got similar behavior in the polar jet stream, a much weaker part of the westerly wind belt coming into the subtropical jet. And it's kind of labeled some areas, wetter and drier. Don't read anything into the size of the letters or anything. I just try to make it easy to read. And I would just say that if this pattern does verify, unlike a year ago, we actually have a decent shot of a cold winter coming out of the Canadian prairie into the northern plains and into the Midwest. More normal, I guess I would say, than cold, but some decent chances of getting some colder air in place. But if it's dry, it's across the southern tier of the U.S. Now, that same La Nina potential, which I think the European model attempted to use as its dominant forecasting piece, in other words, it controlled the model progression the most, is also going to affect South America. And in South America, what we need to be watching over the next 45 days is going to be the pressure pattern in this part of the Atlantic. So remember, how the monsoon works is flow comes around generally a subtropical ridge that lives here and pulls in the moisture off of the Atlantic, while the westerly wind belt here helps spin up fronts that come up out of the south. And those arrows basically just define how South American weather works on the grand scale of things. So when I see higher than normal pressure, I wonder if the monsoon could possibly show up on time. But the greatest area of high pressure being forecast by the models way down here. If you saw these really, really warm colors in this area, then I would tell you that this monsoon is going to start early. It's going to get wet early. You will have extremely rapid planting pace, and things are going to crank quickly. But as it stands, this is the newest forecast for precipitation anomalies from August 15 to September 15. And that monsoonal circulation, while it may enter the northeastern part of Brazil, we do not see, early onset of really wet conditions showing up yet in the model. Okay, if it's wet, it's down here, and a lot of this is going on right now. From there, I want to give you the same kind of maps that I gave you for the U.S. This would be September to November on the left. That would be December to February on the right. Now, I've just labeled what the model is saying. It's gone over drier, suggesting a slower and weaker start to the monsoon, while we stay wetter to the south and possibly drier into Argentina. There's some big wild cards with this, just to be honest with you. I'll watch it. I'll watch the pressure pattern here to see if this really manifests itself. But this drier risk area that I've highlighted, this is in Para. This is up near Rondonia. Wait, if I got this right, I'll have to go back and look at my geography. I'm so sorry. But it doesn't matter. This isn't the main growing areas are here to the south, like Tocantins, Goiás, Mato Grosso do Sul, getting over, Sao Paulo, Paraná, these areas. And that's not that strong of a signal. But I'll be watching for anything that slows that arrival of the monsoon down. December, January, February, if La Nina comes on, the dry risk is in southern Brazil and Argentina. And so the strength of this La Nina will be critical to determining the strength of the westerly winds as they go across Argentina over the Andes Mountains, and how dry that could make parts of southern Brazil. But if it's wetter farther to the north, these three states right here, Goiás, Mato Grosso do Sul, that's 65%, 70% of the growing area for soybeans. Maybe that's a little high, maybe 65%. So we'll have to watch that carefully. Okay, that's what I got for you today. We will talk on Thursday. I'll be out tomorrow morning. I'll be driving all day today, and so we'll just pick it up on Thursday. Have a good one. Thanks.